Your mind is sabotaging your life. And the worst, you don't even notice. Carl Jung discovered something that no one wants to admit. You are not in control of your own life. What if I told you that 90% of your decisions are not really yours? That you are a puppet of your own ego? You're just a program running on autopilot, and it's in control. Most people spend their lives trapped in this mental noise, confusing their own essence with an infinite repetition of doubts, fears, and limiting beliefs. Meanwhile, the real you, the one who can see clearly and make real decisions, is buried beneath layers of conditioning. But here's the point of no return. Once you see behind the curtain, there is no turning back. That incessant voice inside your head seems to be you. It feels like your identity. But Jung showed us that this is an illusion. This mental noise is just the ego, a defense mechanism programmed to keep you stuck in the known. He dictates rules, judges what you did in the past, anticipates negative scenarios for the future, and does everything to ensure you don't get out of his control. Ego doesn't want you to change. Ego wants you to obey. If you fail at something, he whispers, that proves you can't do it. If he feels afraid, he says, better not try again. If you want to change, he teases, you'll never make it. But here's the brutal truth. This is not real. That's not you. It's just a program running in the background. Jung taught us that the human mind is much greater than this mental prison. Those who blindly believe in this voice become slaves to their own limitations. But what if I told you that most people never discover this? And worse, some even realize it, but are swallowed back before escaping. Why? What makes some manage to break this illusion and others spend their entire lives trapped? Sometimes the mind sends us unexpected signals, coincidences so unlikely they defy logic. Jung called this synchronicity, events that seem random but carry deep meaning. He told the story of a patient who dreamed of a golden beetle, and at the exact moment he was talking about it, a similar beetle hit the office window. This unexpected event was a breakthrough moment that helped the patient unlock her psyche. When we learn to see these patterns, we realize that the unconscious not only shapes our beliefs, but also influences the reality around us. There is a real me behind that mask. And the question is, will you continue to be stuck in this mental game, or will you wake up? Jung teaches us that integrating the shadow does not mean surrendering to it, but rather recognizing it and using it consciously. An effective exercise for accessing this hidden part of the psyche is to observe patterns of frustration and irritation. Whenever an intense emotion arises, it's worth asking, what does this reveal about me? Another powerful technique is automatic, uncensored writing to allow the shadow to express itself. Integrating this rejected side of the personality is a fundamental step in the individuation process, for only when the shadow is illuminated can the true self emerge. But this is a challenge that requires direct confrontation with the illusions of the ego. Carl Jung described individuation as the most essential process of psychic development. Unlike simply adapting to social norms, individuation means integrating all the fragmented parts of the psyche, including those that the ego would prefer to keep in the dark. The problem is that most people spend their entire lives trying to fit into external standards, ignoring the internal impulses that point to a deeper meaning of existence. The result is a life marked by a silent emptiness, where decisions are based on fear and external validation. But here's the most crucial point. You are not just a reflection of your past, nor of the circumstances that have shaped your identity until now. You are what you choose to become. Carl Jung said, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." True transformation begins when you take on this responsibility. If you continue to let your ego dictate your choices, you will only be repeating unconscious patterns. But when you decide to act consciously, when you choose to break this cycle, a new path opens before you. This choice is the first step towards individuation. The path of individuation is not comfortable. It requires the willingness to look within and question everything that has been accepted as absolute truth. It means confronting one's insecurities, recognizing where the ego has acted like a tyrant, and allowing repressed aspects to be integrated into consciousness. Someone who has always seen themselves as a peaceful person may discover hidden aggressive traits. Someone who thought they were independent may realize a deep need for approval. These uncomfortable encounters are necessary, as it is only in accepting these polarities that the psyche finds balance. A practical way to begin this process is through critical self-observation. Instead of just reacting emotionally to events, ask yourself, does this response come from my ego or from a deeper place? Practices like dream analysis, which Carl Jung considered a direct portal to the collective unconscious, are also valuable tools. Individuation does not happen overnight. It is an ongoing process. But each step taken in this direction dissolves a little more of the illusions created by the ego. And when this happens, even the mental charade takes on a new meaning. Most people see mental chatter as an enemy, an incessant noise that drains energy and generates anxiety. But Jung teaches us that, instead of trying to silence it by force, it is smarter to listen to it strategically. These recurring thoughts do not appear by chance. They point to unresolved wounds and aspects of the psyche that need attention. If someone is constantly beating themselves up over a past mistake, it may indicate a need for internal reconciliation, not just a random annoyance. What many people do is fight this voice, trying to suppress it or ignore it. But this only strengthens its grip. A mistake made years ago can become an unbearable weight, simply because the ego refuses to integrate the experience as learning. Rather than running away, a more effective method is to write down these thoughts and ask, what do they want to teach me? If the mind insistently repeats a fear or guilt, it does not mean that the person is weak or insecure, just that there is something waiting to be processed. Jung argued that individuation depends on this capacity for conscious internal dialogue. What today seems like torment can, in fact, become a map for personal development. If the mind insists on remembering a failure, perhaps it's time to review the lessons it brought. If there is constant self-criticism, it may be a sign that the ego has created unattainable standards of perfection. Seeing the mental Charla as a messenger and not as a villain transforms its role in the psyche. But this requires a strategic distance from the ego. The root of much human suffering is blind identification with the ego. Carl Jung emphasized that the ego is only a part of the psyche, not its entirety. However, many people live trapped in this limited identity, believing that they are their thoughts, their momentary emotions, and their conditioned fears. This creates an illusion of control, but in reality, it strengthens internal barriers that prevent deeper contact with one's own essence. The more someone clings to the ego, the more they become hostage to its traps. An effective way to break this cycle is to develop the ability to observe your own thoughts as if they were someone else's. Imagine your mind is a radio station broadcasting non-stop. You can hang on to every word or simply listen to it curiously without reacting. This distancing creates a separation between consciousness and the mental stream, allowing the psyche to function more clearly. The most common mistake is to believe that the mind needs to be in complete silence to reach this state. But in fact, the objective is not to stop the thoughts. It is to not be dominated by them. By recording recurring thoughts on paper, it becomes easier to notice their patterns and question their validity. Jung suggested that this type of practice helps to unmask illusions that the ego insists on perpetuating. Over time, this distance allows access to deeper levels of the psyche, where concepts such as the collective unconscious and archetypes begin to reveal themselves. And it is at this point that connection with greater forces of the mind becomes possible. Jung introduced the concept of synchronicity to explain events that, although apparently without causal connection, carry profound meaning for those who experience them. These significant coincidences are not mere randomness, but rather manifestations of the collective unconscious. When someone finds exactly the information they needed at the right time or crosses paths with a person who transforms their trajectory, it is not just luck. It is a reflection of symbolic patterns that operate beyond rational logic. Most people ignore these signs because the ego insists on seeing reality in a linear way, but the psyche doesn't work like that. The subconscious mind and the collective unconscious are constantly interacting with the external world, projecting internal contents and shaping experiences. If someone begins to notice recurring symbols in their life, such as a specific animal appearing repeatedly or a number appearing at key moments, it may be an invitation to explore deeper aspects of one's psyche. These synchronicities act as messages from the mind to anyone willing to listen to them. A practical way to realize synchronicity is to keep a diary of unexpected events and their possible internal connections. Jung argued that these occurrences are not mere accidents, but reflections of broader psychic processes. By interpreting these signs carefully, it is possible to access wisdom that transcends the individual. The psyche sends clues all the time, but it takes a state of presence to grasp their true meaning. And when you learn to recognize these patterns, the mental charade begins to lose strength as the mind no longer needs to fill the void with noise. Most people live trapped in thoughts that are not really theirs. From an early age, beliefs, behavior patterns, and even fears are absorbed from the environment without any questioning. Carl Jung warned of this danger. If the subconscious mind is not examined, it will continue to repeat inherited ideas like a broken record. The problem is not just mental noise, but the lack of discernment about what really makes sense for the individual. Separating oneself from this programming requires a more critical look at one's own internal narrative. A powerful exercise is to question each recurring thought. Does this idea come from me, or was it imposed by someone else? Many of the limiting beliefs that govern someone's life may have been absorbed in childhood or reinforced by past experiences. An individual may grow up believing that they are not good enough for a certain job, not because this is true, but because they have internalized criticism from others. By challenging these assumptions, one begins to dissolve the ego's filters and see the psyche more clearly. Conscious reflection does not mean eliminating thought, but observing it without getting sucked into it. Practices like writing an uncensored thought stream or reviewing critical self-talk can reveal patterns that have gone unnoticed. Analytical psychology teaches that this separation between observer and subconscious mind is essential for personal development. And as this consciousness expands, it becomes possible to access something even more powerful: the archetypes that shape the psyche. Knowing that mental talk doesn't define who you are already changes everything. But understanding this in theory isn't enough. You need to apply this knowledge: separation from the ego, integration of the shadow, the conscious use of archetypes, and the perception of synchronicity are not just abstract concepts. They are tools that can transform your way of thinking and acting. What you do with it now determines whether you will remain a hostage to your own mind or whether you will finally take control. Most people go through life without questioning their internal narratives, without realizing that they are repeating patterns imposed by others. You have a chance to break this cycle, but it requires action. Observe your thoughts, challenge your beliefs, study Jung, analyze your dreams, write down your reflections. The ego will resist, but each time you weaken your identification with it, a more real part of you emerges. If this content made sense to you, don't stop here. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and continue exploring this knowledge. Because one thing is certain: those who understand this no longer see life in the same way.